if you have a dysregulated nervous system, you could try the perfect supplements, the perfect diet, the perfect everything. It's not going to counterbalance a dysregulated nervous system.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. All right, you guys, on Wednesday, you heard from an allopathic physician who helps people diagnose and treat their mast cell activation disorder or syndrome, otherwise known as MCAS. But one thing that we didn't dive too far into because we spent so much time exploring the physiology of MCAS was the resolution and how can you actually heal or manage your symptoms if you do have MCAS. Well, luckily today I am joined by Heather Oricchio, who is an integrative health practitioner who specializes in histamine intolerance and mast cell activation disorder or syndrome. She also focuses on gut health, detoxification, hormone balancing, and guiding women to heal naturally so that they can feel like themselves again. Wouldn't that be nice? If you're like me and you have been experiencing these really scary symptoms of high histamine and mast cell activation, then today's episode is going to be absolutely life-changing for you. Heather not only has the professional knowledge to share, but she also struggled with MCAS herself, but is now in remission. So I wanted to pick her brain about things like, are we born with MCAS? How much does it really have to do with your gut health? Does things like sleep and diet have to do with anything? Can we manage our symptoms with holistic practices like lymphatic drainage, castor oil, red light therapy, and supplements? Could this all boil down to an unregulated nervous system that is on the fritz? And then I obviously wanted to know about environmental things like parasites, mold, EMF, and toxins. Heather is going to share how MCAS can impact your life, what symptoms you may be experiencing, symptoms that you may be experiencing, but you haven't quite realized that it could be mast cell activation. And then we're going to talk about all of the methods of healing so that you can find a practitioner that is aligned with you and get your journey started to taking back your life. The last few years for me of experiencing a random onset of symptoms, really scary things like anaphylaxis, and then all of the brain fog that comes from mast cell activation syndrome has been horrific. I'm so excited to have Heather on the show today because she's a wealth of knowledge. She's so gentle in her approach, and she understands that not only women's health, but mast cell activation syndrome is not a one-size-fits-all. It truly, truly requires individualized care plans to get to the bottom of your root symptoms so you can live a healthier and better life. Without further ado, Heather, welcome to the show.
Hi, HeHe. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. This is obviously a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And the more I talk about it online, the more people hop in my DMs and my emails and my messages to share that either they have MCAS or they've been experiencing similar symptoms as I have, and they didn't know what it was, or they didn't know who to talk to about this, or they've talked to their provider about it and they were dismissed, or they were told it's anxiety, or they were told, yeah, it's allergies. And, women, we know when something is not right, and we know when the answers that we're getting from the allopathic healthcare system is not aligned with what we are feeling and experiencing. So I'm super stoked to have you on the show today. I think this episode is going to help a lot of people feel comforted and also let them know that they are not alone. Like, you're not alone if you are experiencing these symptoms. You are definitely in good company. I was just telling Heather, you guys, before we jumped on, that I have not had an MCAS episode since being pregnant, but I actually had a really severe one 9 days before getting pregnant. And I'll go into that later in the show. But for me, it's just like, this is a really scary thing that happens. For me, the onset was so sudden. I had no idea what it was for years. And now I'm just now getting answers. And so I wanted to bring that information to you guys. So if you're experiencing something like that, you can also have these answers. So, Heather, I think a really great place for us to start before we dive into the real nitty-gritty of the conversation is just explaining what MCAS is and maybe what some of the symptoms are.
Yeah, for sure. So MCAS stands for Mast Cell Activation Disorder. And our mast cells are a part of our innate immune system that are our initial defense. And so we have mast cells throughout our entire body. We have them in our sinuses, in our brain, in our lungs, in our bladder, in our gut. And so anytime it's sensing something that shouldn't be there or can be a potential threat, the mast cells are going to degranulate, which essentially means they're going to release a chemical, and that's going to trigger an inflammation response, trigger your immune system to react. And so there are things outside the body, dust and allergens and pollens and food that can trigger your mast cells. But then we also have internal things like mold and parasites, heavy metals, and kind of other toxins that shouldn't be there in our body. Potential symptoms, they really run the gamut because, again, mast cells are throughout our entire body. So you can get symptoms that are primarily in the gut, so like IBS, constipation, diarrhea, SIBO-like symptoms, small intestinal bowel bacterial overgrowth. And then you can get brain-based symptoms, so things like brain fog, or you can even get neurological symptoms like numbness and tingling. You can have difficulty regulating your temperature, so you're very sensitive to heat or cold or just sudden changes in temperature. We can get hormonal based symptoms, so things like PMS or PMDD. We can see mood disturbances like depression and anxiety. So, this is one of the things that makes it very difficult if you're trying to work with somebody or you're going to your doctor and you're like, you have this entire list of symptoms and they're not going to understand it if they don't have experience, and they're going to tell you it's all in your head and here's your antidepressant, here's your antihistamine, and see you later. Unfortunately, that is the story that I've had so many clients come to me and share with me. And it's really, really heartbreaking because it couldn't be further from the truth. It's just we need somebody to be able to put these complex pieces together and understand that this is the body communicating to you as a whole.
Would you say that many providers out there have not encountered or study or really know that much about MCAS?
Yeah, mast cell activation was not a diagnostic code until 2016. And thinking about that and thinking about how long it takes to really see that implement into practice, it does make sense. I do really see histamine issues, mast cell issues. They've exploded in the past, I would say 5 years. And I think there's so many different things playing a role with that. COVID played a really big role. The electromagnetic fields are playing a really big role. The building materials that people are using now, they're cheaper and cheaper and more prone to growing mold, and the pesticides and VOCs. And so there's all of these different things essentially playing a role of why we're seeing such an increase in it. But 100%, it's not really talked about in medical schools. And if it is, it's more, okay, we're going to test for allergies. You'll get like a skin prick test, or maybe you'll get like a blood IgG test. Many times these people don't even have allergies, traditional allergies. And so it's very confusing. And then that's why you're just given the antidepressant and an antihistamine and just sent on your way.
That was almost to a T what my experience was. And I ended up canceling my back prick test because I just knew intuitively that was not what I needed. And in all honesty, I was doing it in order to get an EpiPen because my symptoms show up as first I get really flush and my it typically starts on my neck and my chest, so if no one is around me I don't know it because I can't see those areas of my body, and then it typically spreads to my arms and sometimes it will go down my body. I will say that the more episodes I have, the worse my symptoms have become, and my
Mhm.
worst episode was the one that I had just 9 days before getting pregnant, and it was absolutely horrendous. I'm married to an EMT, and he is in hospital administration and he has a medical background. And we had decided that if my symptoms were not looking better in the next 10 to 15 minutes, we were actually going to go to the ER. And that was only the second time that we had ever had that conversation. Typically, mine are very manageable at home with like topical or oral Benadryl, and I can put ice on my body and take some deep breaths and really kind of regulate my nervous system through that. But my last two have been absolutely horrendous. And so once the flushing happens, I usually get like urticaria, which is like a full body rash for anyone who doesn't know what that is. And it's really bad. And mine is just so bad. It takes over my face and my neck and my arms, down my stomach and my back and down my legs. My palms and the soles of my feet get super, super itchy. Usually my torso, so my stomach and my back get super itchy as well. And then I do have anaphylaxis as well. So my lips swell, my tongue swells, my throat swells, and that is when, or not when, but that's why we give the Benadryl. The next day, oh my God, I am so sore. My
Mhm.
body is just like literally achy. I feel like I have been hit by a bus, both physically and mentally. I have such bad brain fog. I pretty much always have to take the day off, or I do very like menial tasks, but it's never client facing, and I'm not in emails. I'm not doing anything that requires me to have brain power because the brain power is just simply not there. Mine actually started about 4 months after I got the first COVID vaccine. And
Mhm.
so, not to be a conspiracy theorist by any means, but
Mhm.
I just have to believe that something in the COVID vaccine tripped up my nervous system, immune system, some system in my body, and has put it in overdrive in basically a constant state of fight or flight. And so when I went to allopathic medicine, I started with gynecological care, and my midwife was like, yeah, it's just allergies. Like, it's probably just allergies. Like, here's a antihistamine, take this, have Benadryl on hand. You should get in to see an allergist, get a EpiPen. And I did that, and the episodes continued, and that's why I decided to cancel the back prick. I knew that it was not just traditional allergies, and I knew that there were other providers out there that could give me better answers and also provide me with an EpiPen. And so I actually decided to take my healthcare outside of the allopathic medicine world, and I got with a naturopath. And within our first two visits, she had diagnosed me with MCAS. She had figured out exactly what was happening to me. She had given me an entire plan that was not only aligned with me, it felt easy to do, but it was sustainable. She did not put me on this really rigorous diet. She didn't take away everything that I love in life. She didn't
Mhm.
put me in this bubble. She truly gave me something that was sustainable. And so for me, that's kind of what my symptoms look like. I know that you are in remission, and we'll talk about that because I'm super
Mhm.
interested in that. But when you were struggling with MCAS, what did it look like for you?
Mhm. So I think most people who struggle with MCAS, and it is unfortunately primarily women, which I think hormones and things like that play a role. But looking back, I see the symptoms being very young. And so I remember my mom telling me, oh, you used to get hives a lot when you were a baby. And the doctor said you were just going to get, you had a lot of allergies or you were going to have a lot of allergies, but I'm not allergic to anything to this day. I've never been allergic to anything. So that never made sense. And I was getting migraines. I remember being 5, 6 years old and chewing Motrin. I've taken so much ibuprofen before I figured things out in my 20s. And so migraines were a big thing for me. I was very sensitive to smells. I remember as a child walking into a room and I think I was likely smelling mold and I didn't know it. And I immediately felt ill and I would have to lay on the couch and I would have a migraine and I'd be nauseous and I might be throwing up. And then as things progressed, I would have like really bad PMS and PMDD. And then things got into like more of the SIBO type symptoms. So severe bloating, severe fatigue. I was down to eating 10 foods because I thought these were my only safe foods. And my nervous system was just an absolute wreck. So that's really, when looking back, I see the progression. And I think there's so many things that play a role. There's, the genetics and the environment and my mom's nervous system when I was in the womb and things like that. Most clients that I speak with, when we start looking at the past and things, we're usually able to see there were some early warning signs.
Do you think that, I mean, I have a million questions, but do you think that having parents that don't have great emotional regulation or even having a traumatic background with your parents could kind of develop this or create MCAS in your system?
Yeah, I do. And again, I think there is a genetic component going on there, but for me, I definitely live by the theory of your genes load the gun, the epigenetics pull the trigger. So really epigenetics, those lifestyle factors are 80% of the equation there, but there is some research to show that in utero, the fetal mast cells can be activated. And because the blood-brain barrier is not yet what it needs to be, that the nervous system it's very sensitive to that. And it's kind of the same concept as we've known for a while. If mom's cortisol levels are high, baby's cortisol level can also get triggered. And so we're seeing the same type of pattern with the mast cells becoming activated. And there's so many women who will end up in my DMs and they're like, I have all of these symptoms. My mom, her picture looks very similar. And there's definitely a big relationship there. And of course, environment is playing a role. If everybody grew up in a moldy home, that's going to be contributing. We're drinking the same, fluoride filled tap water and eating the same food with pesticides and things like that. So it's definitely both. But I do think that mom's nervous system is such a big impact on the fetal development. And so that's why nervous system is a huge thing that I talk about like constantly ad nauseum, because I don't think it's emphasized enough. And especially you were talking about working with this naturopath who sounds amazing. I'm so happy you found a practitioner like that because not everybody is as lucky. And many times clients are coming to me and they show me protocols that they were given from other practitioners, and it'll be like 15, 20 supplements. And I'm like, we're lucky if I'm going to put you on 5 supplements for the first 6 weeks. Typically, it's let's focus on our immediate environment. Let's focus on EMF mitigation. Let's focus on your circadian rhythm and doing something to support your nervous system. I tell people checking in with yourself 2 times a day at minimum, 3 times a day. And, for me, what that used to look like was a 10-minute meditation in the morning and being a very type A natured person, and that's the case for so many MCAS clients, yeah. As I like mention meditation, and I'm like, listen, I get it. Meditation doesn't work for me. It didn't work for me either, but finding something that you can do every day where you're checking in with yourself, you're feeling grounded. Maybe it's just cooking, or maybe it's like singing some of your favorite songs. It doesn't have to look like this fancy brain retraining program, although I love them and I think they have their time and place. Something that you're doing every single day to check in with yourself to regulate your heart rate, because if you have a dysregulated nervous system, you could try the perfect supplements, the perfect diet, the perfect everything. It's not going to counterbalance a dysregulated nervous system.
Okay, dive more into that because I know so many ears are perked up in the audience going, "Oh, that's probably me. I should probably tune into the station a little bit more." Tell us a little bit more about our nervous system regulation, especially for the people like you and I who are type A girlies.
Yeah, yeah. And again, so many of my clients are very type A. They're go-getters. They're team no rest. On Sunday, it's I'm not resting. I'm checking off all of these things on my to-do list. And what was a really tough reminder for all of this for me was, I remember getting pregnant and you're forced to slow down when you're pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And you really have no choice. And prioritizing your nervous system is it's so critical because we're regulating our hormones. We're lowering our stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. And we know if we want to support healthy hormone balance, like especially progesterone, because there's some research to show, progesterone helps to produce the Dow enzyme, which is really important in breaking down histamine. Well, if your nervous system is in constant fight or flight, your body's not going to make progesterone. It's going to negatively impact your ovulation. And so that's just one of the ways that we really want to emphasize, okay, prioritizing the nervous system, coming up with a morning routine where we're not looking at our phones, we're not constantly checking social media. This is something that I am frequently telling clients because they're Googling things about themselves constantly. And I'm like, you can't keep going down every single rabbit hole because it's a constant trigger to your nervous system to release these stress hormones. And, EMF mitigation is a huge one I talk about in that category as well, because when you're constantly exposed to electromagnetic fields, that's putting your body into fight or flight because this is unnatural exposure that our body is not supposed to be exposed to, especially at the degree that it is with Wi-Fi right now is in the million times higher than our grandparents were getting exposed to. And so the body is just sensing this constant threat and you're not going to heal, you're not going to detox, you're not going to balance your hormones, you're not going to properly digest your food because your body's just in constant fight or flight all the time. The EMF mitigation is a really great part of that. Sure, you can get EMF protection gear like headphones, not using Bluetooth headphones, a cell phone case that helps to protect from the radiation, a laptop guard, never having your laptop on your lap. And I'm a big fan as well of, they're called green wave filters that you can plug into outlets, especially near your bed, because we have dirty electricity that comes out of the outlets. And that, especially when we think about when we're sleeping, that's the time where we really want to optimize an EMF-free environment because, again, if you're getting exposed to EMFs while you're sleeping, this is your prime detox time. This is our prime repair and recovery, and you're not going to get the maximum amount of benefits. I love using those and also any kind of grounding products. Going outside barefoot is wonderful if you can do it. Sometimes we can't always do it, or going to the ocean. Using a grounding mat, you could use grounding sheets. And then other supports for like nervous system is like acupressure or acupuncture. I think this is really incredible for people who are just really stuck in fight or flight and they're just trying all of these other things that are a little bit more accessible and they're like, it's just not working for me. And so I really love acupuncture. And no, there are some kind of like fancy biohacking gadgets that essentially give you that neurofeedback right away. And some people find that really beneficial. And then lastly, one other one is red light therapy. I love, yeah. I love red light therapy. It is a detox tool. So anytime we're talking about somebody who has MCAS, whenever we're introducing any kind of intervention like that, any kind of holistic type treatment, we have to start low and slow. That is the like biggest takeaway that I want anybody to hear is we're never taking supplements at the highest dose. If we're taking supplements, we're microdosing. And sometimes what that looks like is we're opening up the capsule and we're starting with sprinkles. And so a red light therapy treatment is the same thing. You might just start with 1 or 2 minutes, let's say over the abdomen or maybe over the liver. I love recommending over the thyroid gland for women who struggle with fatigue and they need that thyroid support, or if we have swollen glands in here, probably from a high viral load. And so we're going to slowly build that up, maybe a minute each day, or maybe we're going to skip a couple days because sometimes I notice people have delayed reactions. Same thing goes for castor oil packs. I love castor oil packs. It's one of the first things that I recommend, but they can definitely produce a detox reaction in some people. And just starting with a tiny bit of castor oil right on the skin, leaving it on for a couple minutes, and then we wipe it off. If there's no problem, okay, great. Now, let's say the following day, we're going to try a little bit of that over the right rib cage, over the liver. because we know that liver is our primary detox organ, and there's definitely dysfunction with the liver if we're having mast cell symptoms, if we're having histamine symptoms. Essentially, what we're going to do every couple days, put a little bit more castor oil, and then we're going to slowly increase the time that we'll use it, and that's going to help support bile flow, help support liver function. It helps support the lymphatic system, break down biofilms. It can help with parasites. There's so many benefits with doing that. And what I love about doing it is we don't have to swallow a pill.
Hmm. Yeah, okay. You mentioned not grabbing your phone right when you wake up, and I was like, oh, guilty as charged. That's me. Could
Hmm.
you map out just like a hypothetical, high level morning routine, maybe one that is really quick for the mom
Hmm.
that has multiple children, and then maybe one that is a little bit more in depth and involved for a single girly or someone who has childcare or someone who doesn't yet have children and they have the availability for the time in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah. So something, that moms could do that are, let's say, under 10 minutes is maybe making yourself some fresh ginger tea. So ginger we know is anti-inflammatory, it's antihistamine, it helps to support bile flow. I often see bile congestion as a huge contributor to histamine issues in mast cell. And you're having your fresh ginger tea, maybe we can get some nice sunlight in the eyes, on the skin, stepping outside barefoot. And then maybe we're doing just like a gentle yoga flow, just something very simple. So I could see that being very attainable in 10 minutes. And then somebody who has a little bit more time, I would recommend starting maybe doing a 5-10 minute meditation or breath work, or maybe we're combining that with red light therapy. If we're a little bit more advanced, maybe we're doing sauna, definitely some kind of yoga flow. I feel like that movement is so critical, and that can a lot of times help move us from a mental place of stagnancy as well. Movement, gentle movement is always something that I'm recommending early on. And then getting ourselves a nourishing breakfast. If you tolerate eggs, I love recommending pasture-raised eggs. If not, oatmeal tends to be a safe one for a lot of people, or a chia seed pudding. And then sitting down, listening to some music, and really enjoying and savoring your food. And meanwhile, we're not having the screens in front of us. And another thing that I really emphasize, and this kind of goes in line with the nervous system, like realignment, is I always encourage every client come up with a healing mantra, because you're so used to telling yourself, I have mast cell activation, or I have this, that, and the other symptom. We have to start reprogramming your brain, because as we know, according to Bruce Lipton, what our brain thinks, it's going to program our cells. And it could look something like, I know my body is healing and I love and respect my body, something along those lines that really feels in alignment with you. And that we're going to repeat it throughout the day, especially during those hard times when we're not seeing the progress as fast as we want, because unfortunately, this usually is a long process and it doesn't look like we're healing a lot of the time. And so it can feel very discouraging. And I know, like you've mentioned before, like women can feel like they're alone in this. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. Yeah, I feel like having some combination of a little bit of everything, whether that's the meditation, the breath work, the red light, the soothing ginger tea, a warming breakfast, I feel like that's still like relatively attainable, but we can take our time and really nourish ourselves.
You just gave me so much like pride in myself because I'm doing so much right. I wake up, and I will say before I reach for my phone, and this is new in pregnancy, just because, not for MCAS for any reason, but just because I like to connect with little Saggy baby. But I do a little quick meditation, usually 3 to 5 minutes, and I'll work on my breath work, and I have my hands on my belly and my chest, and I'm talking to the baby, and I'm doing my mantras, and I'm setting my intentions for the day. And then it's then that I typically reach for my phone. And Mr. He will go down and make me some coffee, and then I follow that with breakfast, which I know I should eat before I have coffee, but it's just not. what I do. But then I typically do follow it with getting outside if it's warm enough, which I'm in Boston, so sometimes there's snow on the ground. If it's warm enough, I will do barefoot on the ground. If there's snow on the ground, I at least stand out and let the sun get on some sort of my body, even if it is just my little exposed face because we're in like a blizzard. And then I have recently, in the last probably 6 months, been doing red light therapy, and I absolutely love it. I'm a long time sauna girl. So I have been doing that for several years, and I did not do it in the first trimester, but I am getting back in the sauna in the second trimester and third trimester based on the data from Sweden because the Swedish culture, they sauna their entire pregnancy.
Wow.
And so that's what I've chosen to do for my pregnancy. And I feel really good and secure and safe with the decisions that I've made around sauning. One thing that I'm a little iffy about online is all of these trendy foods, if you will. And I am not one to see a trend and then jump on it. So, what is your opinion on all the trendy foods? Colostrum, bone broth, green
Hmm.
juices. What are those doing for people that already are struggling with MCAS or high histamine?
hmm Yeah, I have to agree with you. Those are really never things that I'm recommending. Fermented foods as well. That's usually what I'll say. The goal at the end of all of this is to get you to tolerating fermented foods. But in my eye, there's no like magic bullet like that where people are like, you need glutamine to heal your gut. I've never recommended glutamine. I've never recommended colostrum. And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this person's very sensitive. Like this is very risky. I've personally like never have done that and tried that. I've used a couple different greens powders or whatnot, but for me, I always have to look at something and say, how much bang are we getting for our buck and how much risk is involved? And so luckily I don't even get those ads on Instagram because I'm so skeptical of them, but I'll have clients constantly asking me, I saw this influencer or this functional medicine practitioner talking about this. Do you think I should try that? And I'm like, personally, I don't really have experience with that. I've never really recommended it for other clients, and so I don't feel comfortable doing that. But when I look at what's the real data that's showing that that is going to be helpful in the short term and long term, I most of the time I don't see it lining up.
Well, it sounds like you have trained your algorithm really, really well. I feel like some of the ads I get online, I'm like, this is so off the wall. A, why is this being served to me? And B, who approved this ad for this company? This is crazy. Okay, you had talked about some gentle movement, and I'm really interested in kind of workouts and moving your body. I was taught about MCAS that sweating is really good, right? Sweating is a way that we can detox and we can move these toxins kind of through our body. But one of the things that I worked with my practitioners is making sure that the workouts I was doing were not sending my body into fight or flight, that they weren't too strenuous, they weren't too intense. Can you talk to us about that? So if there's anyone out there doing HIIT training or really intense training and they already have a nervous system that is really in fight or flight, what should they know about that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because you made me remember a symptom that I used to get that I forgot about, but I used to go running and I remember, when things started getting really bad and intense, I would go running and then I was like, "Oh my God, why are my legs so itchy?" And I'm just like itching them like crazy and then I'm covered in hives and I'm like, "What's going on?" And now I understand that, when you do intense, vigorous exercise like that, you're triggering a cortisol response, you're triggering histamine to be released without a doubt when you're doing high intensity exercise. And so this is not the time to be doing that type of exercise. We want low intensity. And it looks different for everybody. If you can just walk outside, I really try to emphasize going outside as much as I can with clients because we know forest bathing is just incredible for us, incredible to regulate your nervous system. And so I'm like, at a minimum, just go walking outside or go sit on a bench if you don't have the endurance to do the walking. So I'll recommend that if somebody is feeling they're not as intense in their symptoms is that, then okay, let's do some gentle yoga, a hatha flow or something like that. And then if they're able to step it up even more, maybe we're going to start to get into body weight exercises or just holding a plank or something like that. And so the sequence, same thing when we're building up supplement tolerance, the exercise tolerance is going to look the same, but we always want to keep it low intensity. We want to keep our heart rate down. And if we can get to a point where now we're doing resistance weights, that's great. But again, the process can be quite long in getting there. But yeah, when women are like, I'm allergic to exercise, I'm like, it's not exactly what's going on, even though that's what it feels like. This is actually what's happening.
And you may want it to be true. I mean, if you're like me, like, oh, I do not want to go work out. Why can't I just be allergic? I
Hmm.
think for me, a good balance was strength training. So low intensity, but heavier weights, lower reps, and then I actually achieved the sweat from the sauna. And I think a lot of people equate working out to sweating, and if you don't sweat, you're not having a good workout. And I know that was me for a long time, and I had to reprogram my brain to say working out, the only goal of working out is not to sweat. Sometimes
Hmm.
you've got other goals. It could be mental health, it could be strength building, it could be flexibility, it could be working on your joints or your mobility. And so for me, that balance was struck between low intensity weightlifting, strength training with a sauna, and not necessarily followed by one another. I didn't always do them on the same day, but I
Hmm.
achieved that sweat by doing something different, and it didn't have to come from a really high intensity workout. Um,
Hmm.
okay, you had talked about progesterone, and I'm wondering if progesterone and cortisol are antagonists. So, when your cortisol is high, does that mean that it is actually inhibiting progesterone?
Yeah, and so a term that they use in like the functional medicine world is they'll call it a cortisol steal. And so we can't say it's not 100% of the time, but there is definitely a very strong relationship between having high cortisol, without a doubt, having high adrenaline, and that essentially blocking and suppressing your progesterone production. When we think about it, it makes a lot of sense. And it's really the body's innate wisdom of saying, even though, let's say, your goal is not potentially to become pregnant, when we think about fertility, when a woman is very fertile, we know that things are really balanced and they're essentially the way that they should be. And so the body's innate wisdom is saying, okay, if adrenaline is high and cortisol is high, this is probably not a good, safe place for us to produce a pregnancy right now. And so it will delay ovulation or shut down ovulation. And so that's something that I explain to women a lot of times. I'm like, if we want to support your body's ability to break down histamine, your natural inflammatory response, we have to, again, prioritize that nervous system, get that cortisol and adrenaline balance, and then that's going to naturally support your progesterone production. And another really big player in that is insulin as well. So when insulin is really imbalanced, blood sugar is really imbalanced, that's going to negatively impact progesterone, in addition to many other things. And that's because the mast cells are extremely sensitive to insulin.
That was something that I worked really hard on with my functional medicine doctor is balancing my blood sugar. I did not eat right. I didn't eat frequent enough. I didn't eat enough food. I wasn't eating
Mhm.
the right things, and my blood sugar was all over the place. And who's to say one didn't cause the other? I guess one did cause the other. Who's to say which one caused which? But I certainly was not prioritizing the correct eating patterns, and it definitely made my MCAS worse, or my
Mhm.
symptoms just they became more frequent. So when I first had MCAS, I was having 1 to 2 episodes a year. Last year, I had 6 episodes alone in the year 2024. Are you seeing MCAS impacting fertility? So, are you seeing patients with MCAS struggling to either achieve pregnancy or sustain pregnancy, and they're experiencing a lot of loss?
Yeah. So I don't know if I can for sure say that it's like the MCAS of causing the infertility or all of that. But when we think about, okay, what's causing the MCAS? I could see all of those essentially overlapping with why you're not able to get pregnant. If you have a high pathogen load or chemical load, if the liver is really overwhelmed, we know it's not going to be metabolizing hormones properly, which is one of its jobs, in addition to the blood sugar aspect. And so I think as far as root causes of both, there's has to be an overlap. But as far as MCAS causing it, I don't know that I could for sure say that, but I also haven't dug into the research.
It was one of my biggest fears and one of probably my secondary nudge. My first nudge was we got to get these symptoms under control because I am
Mhm.
having anaphylaxis multiple times a year and this is hella scary. It is incredibly scary to have an MCAS episode, or it is for me at least. And my secondary reason was I knew that we were wanting to grow our family in the next few years, and I was worried that, and this is not data driven for anyone listening. This is just simply the logic in my brain. But if my body was stuck in fight or flight and it was having reactions to what at the time we assumed were outside things causing a big reaction, I was thinking in my brain, when I have a baby that implants, what are the chances my body attacks it? Because
Mhm.
it's new and it receives it and perceives it as a threat. And so
Mhm.
that's what I did not want. I'm really lucky and grateful that it did not impact my fertility journey. And I do think it is just so strange that I had an attack just 9 days before I got pregnant. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, thinking about like the hormonal fluctuations that happen in a woman's cycle, most of the time, women who have intense histamine or mast cell symptoms, they're going to happen at potentially two different points. So, either in the follicular phase when estrogen is just starting to rise, or it is a little bit different kind of all around the board, but that could be one point. I would say predominantly it's going to be the ovulation phase because we see estrogen and progesterone rising, and then in a little bit in the luteal phase as well. And to me, that's pointing to it was probably estrogen contributing to that because we know there's a big relationship between estrogen and histamine. One can essentially increase the other. And so women, when they're reporting or when they're just figuring out that they have a histamine or mast cell problem, they're like, I don't know why my symptoms are worse, like right before my period, or my symptoms are worse during ovulation. And then I explain to them that relationship between histamine and estrogen, and they're like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. So that's what's going on through my mind. But then when it comes to mast cell, there are so many potential triggers. And was there an increased stressful event that happened at some point in the 30 days prior? Was there more pollen? Because I know lots of people I'm working with now, they don't necessarily have allergies, but just the fact that there's more pollen and allergens in the air, it's triggering to their body and making some of their other symptoms worse. Potentially the environment could be playing a role, the emotional state, and then the hormonal state.
It is so wild to hear you say that because so my last attack was in February and I also got pregnant in February, but I had decided with my naturopath to start tracking symptoms in December. I didn't have an attack in December and I didn't have an attack in January. And so when I had an attack in February, we were like, let's mark it down. And we had planned to track it for the next 6 months because Mr. HeHe and I decided that we were going to start trying in July. We fell pregnant in February, so that tracking is a little bit on pause now. But it is funny to hear you say that because I had originally thought that I had estrogen dominance. And that was
Hmm.
my main complaint when I went to my naturopath at first. I said, I think I have estrogen dominance. I'm having the worst PMS symptoms. I am having the worst periods. I was working with an acupuncturist and she had fixed my periods a lot, but not completely. And when I went to the naturopath, she said, you don't have estrogen dominance. This is MCAS. And I was like, oh my God. And I just have to think how long I would have been ping pong back and forth between providers and allopathic medicine before someone would have figured this out. And it literally makes me cringe and also feel super grateful that I decided so quickly to take my medicine or my medical care outside of the traditional system.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, 100%. And again, so many other women are not as fortunate, and I get told different horror stories of getting sent to different doctor and OB and gastroenterologist. It's amazing that your practitioner is so skilled. And I'm really happy for you that you got to figure things out, especially at such a critical time when you really need that extra support.
Yeah, it was critical for sure. Okay, you've mentioned a couple of things that I really love: castor oil, red light, sauna.
hmm
What about lymphatic drainage? Are you a
hmm
fan and does it help with MCAS?
Yeah. So I'm very, very passionate about lymphatic drainage. And I was initially an occupational therapist and I
Okay.
shadowed a OT who was an expert in MLD and in manual lymphatic drainage. And one of my gripes with like social media trends is seeing people dry brush, but they're dry brushing incorrectly. And so check out Kelly Kennedy. She has a video online. It's the proper way to dry brush because we should not be starting all the way down here and then just trying to push fluid. We have to start proximally and then work our way distally. So I'm a huge fan of manual drainage, but I think again, with any detox practice, we have to start low and slow. And thinking about the proper way to do that is we should actually be touching our skin very, very lightly and softly because the lymphatic tissue is very superficial underneath the skin. And so when you see people pushing really, really hard, they're actually doing that incorrectly. And you're going to be more likely to have a detox reaction because of like the significant, not necessarily trauma, but that's just not the way that the lymphatic system is meant to be supported. And so you can do it manually. You can use a dry brush. You could do rebounding. So yeah, I mean, just walking. Anytime we're moving our muscles, anytime we're contracting our muscles, that's going to be supporting the lymphatic system. So 100%.
Wow, I didn't know that. So dry brushing and the gentle touching of lymphatic drainage, is that safe in pregnancy?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Oh my gosh, that's not anything that I have incorporated into my pregnancy thus far, but I will after this episode for sure. Okay, you've mentioned a lot about gut health and mold,
hmm
toxins. I'd love to hear about that, parasites even. I want to
hmm
hear more about the gut-brain connection and how that plays a role in MCAS.
Yeah. Yeah, thinking about the top root causes of MCAS, it's really mold I see as being one of the biggest triggers. And when we think about how mold and mycotoxins are triggering the body, unfortunately, mycotoxins, many of them, they do not discriminate. And so they impact your brain, they impact your lungs, they impact the reproductive system, the digestive system, and the kidneys and liver are usually hit the hardest because those are the main detox and drainage organs that mycotoxins go through. And so again, when we're thinking about MCAS presents in so many different ways with so many different symptoms, many times that's because mold is at the root cause and because it's impacting all of these different organs. And so mold is a big focus for, if not most, if not all of my clients. And I just see it heavily impacting the nervous system, especially causing anxiety, causing brain fog, causing light sensitivity is a big one that a lot of people don't necessarily pick up on. And so I'm always thinking about functional lab tests that I do with every client. A mycotoxin test is always number one. A stool test is another one to check your gut health. We check for parasites. If we don't see them, I don't always take that as a you don't have them because even though our stool testing is getting better and better, parasites are just smarter than our technology, I think, ever will be. And then we also get to look at like immune markers, secretory IgA, that's where the gut and the immune system communicate. We can check zonulin, we can see how bad is that leaky gut. We can look at digestive markers. And then for hormones, I love using a Dutch test. It stands for Dried Urine Test for Comprehensive Hormones. So, so helpful when we're looking at the MCAS picture as well, because one of the beautiful things about this test is it's showing your estrogen profile. And so it's not just getting your estradiol levels in blood. That's pretty much the only way we get them checked conventionally. We get to look at your three estrogen hormones, your E1, E2, E3, and then we get to see what does your phase one and phase two liver detox look like because that's so important for metabolizing toxins, mycotoxins, and that influences, your methylation pathway, which we know plays a really big role in like histamine regulation. And so we get so much information just from this one little section on the Dutch test. But then we also get to look at your progesterone, your androgens, and then your cortisol pattern, which of course is going to influence all of the other sex hormones. So that's what I'm looking at when I'm trying to assess what are the top root causes of somebody with mast cell activation. And in addition to some blood work markers, homocysteine iron panel because there's a huge relationship between iron dysregulation and mast cell activation, and then just some of the metabolic numbers as well.
It is so interesting to hear you say that. The Dutch test was one of the tests used in my diagnostic, and it was just my diagnostic testing. It was just insightful. I did it
Hmm.
several years ago, and I was much younger and much healthier, and I had forgotten about it. And then my practitioner was like, "Have you ever heard of the Dutch test?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've done one before." And it was just eye-opening. I had my eyes were bulging out of my head, my jaw was on the floor. I was like, "Oh my God, look at all of this information that you can get from just a 24-hour cycle of collecting your urine." And you guys, it's so easy. I actually put up a video on Instagram. So if you don't follow me, find me at Tranquility by HeHe, and you can see the video of me doing the Dutch test. It is truly so easy. I think people always get really weirded out by collecting stool samples or urine samples, and the Dutch test makes it so easy. It's just, I just can't say anything other than it is literally so easy to collect your urine and to send that off. We've talked a lot about kind of our whole body systems, but one thing that you've touched on and I haven't asked about is circadian rhythm. How does
Hmm.
sleep play a role in MCAS and or our histamine production or kind of processing that histamine?
For sure. Sleep is, of course, the foundation to any kind of healing protocol. And one of the main reasons for that is we do a lot of our detoxing during sleep. We do a lot of our repair during sleep. We're going to be balancing blood sugar if we're getting the right amount of sleep. And we know how big of a role blood sugar plays on our mast cells. If you're not sleeping, we know that those hormones are then going to be dysregulated. What I'm often seeing is women are complaining to me that they can't fall asleep, that they might feel anxious, and because their histamine symptoms are the worst at nighttime. And one of the goals early on is let's regulate those histamine levels so then you can fall asleep and stay asleep. And then the same thing in the early morning time, histamine tends to also be higher in the morning. And so, if we can optimize our circadian rhythm by using some of those techniques, optimizing the bedroom, keeping the curtains, using blackout curtains, and not looking at our phone a couple hours before bed, that's going to have a tremendous impact on our hormones, on regulating cortisol, on optimizing melatonin. We know melatonin is very protected for the brain, and it also has some mast cell stabilization aspects to it. So, circadian rhythm, like with nervous system regulation, that's something that I talk about heavily because, again, if your circadian rhythm isn't balanced, we are not going to be able to really make any progress. This is us following our natural biological rhythms that we're all born with. And it can be a difficult conversation because I have worked with a few night shift workers. And I'm like, we can do our best and let's see if we can make that progress. But at the end of the day, if we're not seeing the progress that we want, then that's going to lead me to believe it's because you're not following those natural rhythms that our body is meant to be in. And then it's negatively impacting all of your hormones, essentially causing this like negative cascade effect.
That's really tough. I, as a doula, obviously work night shift because we provide overnight care. And I will say that the busier we are with overnight care, the worse my symptoms are. It look like if you were having high histamine at night, other than not being able to fall asleep, which I feel like so many of us just brush off as I'm anxious or I'm overtired or I had coffee really late today. What kind of things would you be feeling or I guess experiencing to lead you to believe that it was high histamine rather than anxiety or drinking a latte too late?
So you can find that you'll get those typical like histamine symptoms. So if you're somebody that struggles with the chronic postnasal drip or the nasal congestion or bloating or hives, so any of those, if you're noticing any of those histamine-based symptoms becoming more intense, and or if you notice taking a antihistamine support, whether that's something over the counter or something herbal, if that helps, then that's really good information to tell you that it is. Or if you're like, you know what, I did eat chocolate or cheese, some other type of high histamine food, and then I couldn't sleep. That's going to be very telling.
Interesting. We've talked a lot about, I think, supplements. We've hinted at them. What kind of supplements are really good for people with high histamine? Would magnesium help? I know Epsom salt is not an ingested one, but I'm thinking Epsom salt baths. What do you say about those?
Yeah. So, the first and most important thing to say is there's no perfect supplement for every person. And I'll list off some things, but that's really for like you and your practitioner to look at the whole picture. Because for me, for example, I always do better with a magnesium malate, but everybody's always recommending magnesium glycinate. And so I tried magnesium glycinate one time at night because that's when it's recommended. And there's no better way to explain it than like I felt like I was on some type of like drugs, like it
Like
was a
speed.
very intense experience. My nervous system was completely ramped up and it was like no way I was going to sleep. And I was like, this is crazy. And so that's a very typical experience that women with mast cell will report. Like they take melatonin, they're like, I couldn't sleep and it made me really anxious. And something to always consider. And again, the concept of microdosing, but let's say we're just trying to do some general histamine support. The one that's talked about by everybody because it's the strongest herbal mast cell stabilizer is going to be quercetin. And now quercetin is good for some people, it's not good for everybody. And so the people that should really avoid it are people who are anemic because it is an iron chelator. I do think that might be part of the reason why it has mast cell stimulating properties is because iron excess can definitely trigger histamine. And then the other people that should avoid quercetin are people who have what's called a COMT gene mutation, and that stands for catecholamine methyltransferase. And this has to do with how you break down estrogen and how you break down catecholamines like dopamine and adrenaline. And so people, if you've taken quercetin and it's making you very anxious or you feel like you're crawling out of your skin, that's pointing to a sign that you might have a COMT gene mutation. So the next one below that is going to be nettles. That's a little bit more friendly, but again, I've had women who have complained that it causes itching because even though it can help with itching, there's the potential that it can do that as well. So those are the top herbal ones. More recently, I've been really enjoying using inositol, which has so many amazing benefits with blood sugar. It's amazing for women with PCOS, balancing out those androgens. So that's another great one. And then sometimes using a binder. So Zeobind is by a company called BioPure, and we can just start with like comes in a powder, so you can just start with a very fine amount, mixing it in water and drinking it. And it has some binding properties to mycotoxin and to some heavy metals, but also to histamine, which is really cool. And then if we're going to do like a blend, one that I commonly will recommend if somebody doesn't tolerate some of the quercetin and nettles and things like that is a product called Masties by Beyond Balance. And I love it because it's liquid, there's no alcohol component, it's very pure and it's tested to be very tolerable for people with chronic conditions, mast cell, mold, Lyme. So those are some of the initial supports that I might use. But again, that's after we've worked on the nervous system piece and maybe we're doing the lymphatic drainage and castor oil packs.
And what about a probiotic, since we know that gut health has a lot to do with it? And are there certain strains of probiotics that we're looking for?
Yeah, so there are high histamine producing probiotics, and then there are ones that help break down histamine. And so I am actually very cautious about using probiotics early on because I tend to see the majority of women, they don't do well with it. And I think that goes back to having a lot of bacterial overgrowth or fungal overgrowth because when you have that and then you're taking more probiotics, you're essentially still feeding the harmful bacteria, even though it feels like you shouldn't be. So I am not recommending probiotics in the first couple months, but if I do, maybe we'll just start with a plantarum or maybe a strain of bifido. I avoid the lactobacillus family. And if you're looking for a blend, if you've gotten to that point, I would say definitely try one or two strains before you go for a blend. But Seeking Health makes a really nice low histamine one. That's kind of the general consensus that I've seen. And of course, the goal is we want to be able to get those bacteria from our food. But until we get to that point, those could be some potential options.
And what kind of foods would give us those type of probiotics?
Yeah, prebiotic foods are going to be really helpful. So they're helping to feed that bacteria, chia seeds, flax seeds, some of the other like sunflower seeds. And then we can get into, of course, the fermented foods, progressing to like kimchi or making your own kind of cabbage-based carrot, fermented carrots, and things like that.
Wow, okay. All right, Heather, you are in remission from your MCAS. So I'm
Mhm.
super eager to hear what your healing journey looked like. And obviously, you guys, you hear me say this all the time. Test, don't guess. So don't take this episode and implement the things that Heather and I are talking about that worked for us. That's not how health works. What we're doing is telling you what worked for us so that you know that it is an option so that you can take it to your provider and ask and test to see if it is appropriate for you. But Heather, what did your healing journey look like? What were some of the protocols that you used that you found successful?
hmm Yeah, it's of course a very long story. And I remember really struggling. And my husband was like, I know that you know a lot because it was early in my health coaching journey. But he was like, you need outside perspective on this. So I went to a naturopath, a well-respected naturopath in Encinitas. And he unfortunately gave me some supplements and I had the worst hurts of my entire life. And so he ended up ghosting me. And so I ended up just figuring it out on my own. And one of the things that was really critical for me as being someone who was chronically constipated was castor oil packs, but also colon hydrotherapy and doing coffee enemas. And so that was the only way that I could start to tolerate some protocols. Because what ended up happening was I tried some candida supplements, which we know candida is like a natural yeast that we have, but when it's overgrown, it's going to produce a lot of brain fog and bloating and all of that. So I was taking some candida supplements and I just started doing castor oil packs and I expelled a parasite. And I was just like, I knew parasites were part of my picture. And I wasn't even taking like traditional anti-parasitic herbs. That was my body's way of being like, you're finally figuring it out, you know. And I ended up putting myself through different protocols. So really addressing parasites first, then addressing mold, and then addressing heavy metals while doing sauna and the colon professional colonics, but also coffee enemas at home. And then the nerve system piece, I was doing hot yoga. I started to get into astrology and just exploring different parts of myself. Because what happens when you get sick is it's just that's all you're doing is you're researching different things. You're really isolating yourself from the outside world. So I was also starting to reintegrate myself into society and starting to like, what are the things that I enjoy again? But yeah, as far as detox, it was basically like a 9-month process of me moving through different protocols that I was putting together myself because I went to the naturopath, I went to the GI doctor, I went to the OB, the endocrinologist, and I wasn't getting any answers.
It's really tough to be dismissed in the traditional healthcare system. I mean, I think there are so many listeners out there. I mean, including myself, obviously, I shared that with you guys that that's our experience, right? You go and you say something is wrong, and they say, no, there's nothing wrong. Or they say, your labs look great. Or they say, yeah, it's
Mhm.
anxiety. That's what's wrong. Or it's your weight. Have you tried losing weight? It's just so frustrating. Okay, I cannot let us pass up the topic of coffee enema. I just had this mental picture of you just squirting coffee up your booty hole. Can you please explain to us what it is and how did you decide that that was the right move for you?
Yeah. When you are somebody who is chronically constipated, you get to a point where you're willing to try anything for relief. And so my IBS symptoms were so severe. I would go 3, 4 days without having a bowel movement. And then when I did, it was like explosive. And I was working in healthcare and it's like, I need to be functional. So I don't remember how I initially learned about it or anything like that, but I was like, I feel like this is really going to help me. And then having learned about all of the potential benefits, some of the research shows that when the coffee goes into the colon and it hits the hepatic portal vein coming off of the liver, then it triggers the gallbladder to release bile and to dump a lot of that stagnant bile. And again, I see a massive relationship between bile dysfunction and histamine issues. And a lot of times I see that happening before the histamine or mast cell symptoms even come about. So gallbladder dysfunction is happening years prior. And then we see some of those other symptoms starting to happen. So I'm always talking about bile support. So coffee enemas are amazing bile support in that way. And they help to increase your glutathione production. Some say up to 700%. We know glutathione is like our master detoxifying antioxidant. And yeah, it's a matter of boiling the coffee, or you can brew it the traditional way that you're making your coffee. Of course, you want to use a very clean, mycotoxin-free, organic one, letting it cool. And then you can can put some water in there, dilute it. Definitely, of course, if we're talking about somebody with MCAS, they're not going to start an enema with coffee. They're definitely going to start with just water. And then maybe we're just going to do a tiny amount and increasing as we would with other interventions. But the goal is to retain that for 10 minutes, 12 minutes, because what's happening is every 4 minutes, the liver is processing all of the blood in our body. It's filtering all of the blood. And so if we can do that for a couple cycles, we're going to get a lot of detoxification benefits from that. And what you can notice just after one is, of course, like improved digestion. You can see that your skin is actually looking a little bit more clear. And then also the eyes, because we know that the eyes in Chinese medicine are heavily connected to our liver. And you'll see that the whites of your eyes look a little bit whiter and the irises can even look a little bit more clear. And for me, it was life-changing. Without a doubt, I was not able to tolerate detox until I had that support.
Okay, and when you say retain it, do you mean squirt it up there and then hold it in?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, got it. My mind is blown. I'm just totally like spiraling in outer space here. This is
hmm
crazy, but it makes so much sense. And I'm also wondering, I guess a question that just dropped into my brain was, do you think that we can be born with MCAS? Because I struggled with IBS much like you did, all as a child, and I would have the worst stomach aches. I'm talking like
hmm
I was diagnosed with stomach ulcers and then I just like magically grew out of them, but we didn't really do anything to change so much. I remember being told I couldn't have ketchup and it was my favorite condiment, which as a small child, it's, oh my God, I love ketchup. How can I live without ketchup? But I just, that never, as an adult, when I look back over my medical history, having stomach ulcers never really felt like that was the true problem. And several
hmm
years ago, I guess it was actually right around COVID because we were wearing masks in the ER. I went to the ER thinking I was having a gallbladder attack, and
hmm
it ended up being, as embarrassing as it is, I was literally just constipated. And the ER
Yeah.
doc came in and was like, we've got good news and bad news. Your gallbladder is not attacking you, so that's the good news. The bad news is you're literally filled with shit, ma'am. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am mortified and also very relieved that I don't have to have a surgery. And also, how can this be? How could I be having what I thought was regular bowel movements, but I'm so constipated that it gave me a stomach ache that sent me to the ER.
hmm
Truly thought something was wrong with me. They were like, you may need to have surgery. And I was like, yes, absolutely. It feels like
hmm
I need to have surgery. Something is not right inside of me. So, do you think that this could be something that we're born with, and that just as we get older, the symptoms become more and more aggressive until finally we go, hey, this might be MCAS?
hmm Yeah, I think again, going back to the potential genetic imprint that your mother's nervous system had, your mother's toxin load, because unfortunately, things like mycotoxin pass over the placenta and they also pass in breast milk. So if mom has been exposed to that, if mom has a high heavy metal load, we know that her mercury, especially in the first children, the mercury and the lead, she can pass up to 50% of those stores. Also, firstborns, they tend to have a little bit of higher revved nervous system. So looking at all of those components, but yeah, I definitely think you can be a little bit more prone to having mast cells that are more sensitive. And unfortunately, exactly what you're describing your experiences is what we're seeing across the board is people, once you have one mast cell attack response reaction, you are at a higher risk for them to continue and for them to intensify because it's essentially like the mast cells are just there. They're ready to waiting to degranulate. And so at the next trigger, at the next smell of fragrance, they have the opportunity to do that. So yeah, for sure. It's definitely a combination, but I do think that you can essentially be a little bit more prone to that.
Wow. Oh my gosh, Heather, this has been amazing. It has been such a good conversation. You've made light bulbs go off in my head. You have connected some dots that were otherwise left unconnected. And I know that our listeners are feeling the same way. If anybody wanted to work with you, learn from you, connect with you, where can they do that? And what kind of offers do you have in order to work one-on-one with people?
Yeah, for sure. My main website is revivewithheather.com. I'm on all social media platforms. I'm primarily active on Instagram, where it's revive underscore with underscore Heather. And then as far as programs, so I do have a one-to-one program, 6 month, where we're running those functional labs. We're creating a customized protocol. It's keeping in mind that you are likely sensitive and we're going to be titrating things very slowly. And so, if anyone's interested in that, you can find a link to book a call either through my Instagram or through my website directly. And then I am developing a course to be able to offer people a different way of getting educated on this, keeping in mind that we're sensitive and that we need to address all areas of the body in an equal way.
I love your holistic approach. Your Instagram is one of my favorites. I find that I seek out your Instagram. I'm like, okay, what did Heather post now? Like, I need to see what Heather's posted today. I absolutely love it. And I got to be honest, it came up just on my feed as a suggested post and it spoke to me. And I was like, oh my God, she gets it. She's one of us. She's like me. And as I went through your Instagram, I was like, oh man, I really, really want to have her on the show to share her wisdom with our listeners just because like I say you get it and you are a practitioner who truly believes in a holistic approach and you listen to us and you're truly there to give us individualized care to help us live a healthier and better life. And I think that is super hard to find, and as women we really long for that. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that. Thank you for the care that you're giving women all over the world, and thank you for being here with us today. All right, listeners, I will see you in the next episode. Be sure to follow Heather on social media, and you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe and at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm HeHe, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.